In 2020, the US borrowed $3.8 trillion, 18% of GDP, to fight COVID. But why borrow when you can just print? Because once trust vanishes, even mighty dollars turn worthless. What really keeps money alive? The mystery unfolds in why can't countries just print money and make everyone rich? What if your president pressed Control-P and printed infinite cash? Picture this. The president walks into the palace press room, sits down at a giant computer, and hits Control+P. Suddenly, the world's biggest printer roars to life, spitting out endless stacks of shiny new bills. Guards load them into bags and dump them on the streets. People cheer, markets buzz. Everyone's holding cash like confetti at a parade. For a moment, it feels like paradise. But then, reality hits. Overnight, bread costs $1,000. Taxi rides? $500. Salaries mean nothing because the paper in your pocket is losing power faster than water leaking from a bucket. You're rich in numbers, but poorer than ever in life. This isn't fantasy, it's history. In Zimbabwe, 2008, the government printed so much money that they had to issue $100 trillion banknotes. Sounds impressive, right? Yet those notes couldn't even buy a loaf of bread. A family needed a wheelbarrow of cash just to shop for dinner. And in Weimar, Germany, 1923, workers got paid twice a day because by evening, the same cash could barely buy potatoes. The truth is shocking. Money is not wealth. It's only a tool of exchange, a symbol of trust. You can't eat it, live in it, or drive it. Its value comes only from what backs it: goods, services, and confidence in a system. That's exactly what economist Manuel Ayau warned about. He said, money is like a mirror. It reflects real production, but it doesn't create it. Print more mirrors, and you don't get more faces, you just distort the reflection. So, if money isn't wealth, what is it really? And why do countries risk disaster by printing too much of it? Let's dive in, because once you see how this game works, you'll never look at a dollar the same way again. If money makes us rich, why did Zimbabwe print a $100 trillion bill? Picture this. Zimbabwe, 2008. A loaf of bread in Harare costs 35 million Zimbabwean dollars in the morning. By evening, the same loaf costs 50 million Zimbabwean dollars. Overnight, cash turns into quicksand. You grab more, but it sinks faster than you can hold it. To keep up, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe printed bills so absurd that the world laughed. A $100 trillion banknote, the highest denomination ever issued on Earth. But here's the sad punchline. Those bills couldn't even buy lunch. Hyperinflation, that monster, isn't unique to Zimbabwe. It struck Weimar, Germany in 1923, where factory workers carried their wages home in wheelbarrows. By November that year, prices doubled every 3.7 days. Imagine getting paid in the morning, rushing to the store, and discovering by evening your cash buys only half as much. Kids used stacks of marks as building blocks. People burned money for heat because it was cheaper than firewood. Fast forward, Venezuela, 2018. The annual inflation rate hit 1 million%. Salaries became meaningless. An entire month's pay couldn't cover a single carton of eggs. Citizens abandoned their own currency and used US dollars, Colombian pesos, or even bartering with food and clothes just to survive. Here's the killer question. If printing money really makes everyone rich, why did these countries collapse instead of thrive? Why didn't those $100 trillion notes make Zimbabwe the wealthiest nation alive? The answer lurks in what money truly is and isn't. Because money isn't wealth. It's a shadow of wealth, and that shadow gets darker when trust is broken. So, what is money anyway? Paper? Gold? Or just trust? Close your eyes and imagine paying for dinner with seashells. Sounds silly, but thousands of years ago in the Pacific Islands, cowrie shells were treasured currency. In ancient China, they were used for centuries before coins even existed. That's the first clue. Money isn't always paper. It can be anything people agree has value.
Jump forward to the Age of Empires. For thousands of years, gold and silver ruled.
Why? They were rare, shiny, and couldn't be faked easily. The Romans minted solid gold aureus coins that paid soldiers and built the empire. Even after Rome fell, gold stayed the ultimate symbol of wealth. Fast forward again. By the 19th century, almost every major country locked its currency to gold under what we call the gold standard. Here's how it worked. Every US dollar was tied to a fixed amount of gold. Specifically, $35 bought 1 ounce of gold after World War II. That meant America couldn't just print money unless it had gold bars in Fort Knox to back it up. This system kept global exchange rates stable for decades. But then came August 15th, 1971, a day now called the Nixon shock. US President Richard Nixon stunned the world by cutting the dollar loose from gold. From that moment, money became fiat currency, paper with no gold backing, only faith. The dollar wasn't worth gold anymore. It was worth whatever people trusted it to be. That's why some call fiat money fake money. But here's the paradox. The US dollar didn't collapse after 1971. In fact, it grew even stronger because people trusted America's economy and military power. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If trust disappears, money instantly becomes worthless wallpaper. Just ask Hungarians in 1946, who saw prices double every 15 hours, making their pengo notes useless overnight. Which raises a bigger puzzle. If printing breaks trust, then why do governments borrow instead of just firing up the printing presses? Why do governments keep borrowing instead of printing? Imagine this. The US government spends around $4 trillion a year, but only collects $3 trillion in taxes. That's a $1 trillion hole. Now, 3 choices appear on the table. Raise taxes, politicians fear protests, cut spending, hospitals, schools, and pensions would collapse overnight. The easiest option, borrow the missing trillion. But wait, why not just print it? After all, the government has the printers, right? Here's why. Every time a country prints cash without backing it, inflation sneaks in. Prices rise because there's more money chasing the same amount of goods. Borrowing, on the other hand, spreads the pain slowly. It comes with interest and deadlines, which keeps leaders disciplined and, most importantly, keeps trust alive. Let's put it into perspective. In 2020, when COVID-19 froze the global economy, America borrowed $3.8 trillion in a single year. That's about 18% of its GDP. Instead of firing up the printing presses, the US sold treasury bonds to investors at home and abroad. Why? Because if they had printed that much, the dollar might have spiraled into a Zimbabwe-style disaster. Borrowing allowed Washington to pump money into stimulus checks, business aid, and vaccines, while still signaling to the world, we'll pay this back. And here's the kicker. Investors believed it. Why? Because the US has never defaulted on its debt, unlike countries such as Argentina, which defaulted 9 times, or Russia in 1998, which shocked the world when it stopped paying. That credibility makes borrowing safer than printing. But here's the shadow hanging over it all. Every loan makes the debt mountain higher. Today, America owes over $36 trillion, more than its entire economy produces in a year. So the big scary question is, if borrowing is safer than printing, then who really decides the value of money? Meet money's biggest villains, inflation, and its ghostly partner, trust. Picture this. You wake up with a full wallet. But by the time you get to the market, the same wallet buys half as much. That's the trick of inflation. The loud, flashy villain who makes money weaker every day. And standing right behind him, almost invisible, is his ghostly partner, trust. Once people lose faith in money, it doesn't matter how many bills you hold. Let's start with inflation's most famous crime scenes. In Weimar, Germany, 1923, prices doubled every few days. Families pushed wheelbarrows full of banknotes just to buy bread. $1, which had been worth 4.2 German marks in 1914, skyrocketed to 4.2 trillion marks by late 1923. Parents burned banknotes to heat their homes because firewood was cheaper than cash. Fast forward to Zimbabwe in 2008. Inflation hit an almost unthinkable 79.6 billion% per month. The central bank printed a $100 trillion note, yet it couldn't buy a bus ticket. Imagine holding a bill with 14 zeros and being laughed at by a shopkeeper because it wasn't enough. That's what reckless money printing does. And then comes Venezuela, 2018. Inflation topped 1 million% in a single year. A cup of coffee cost 2,000 bolivars in the morning and 3,000 by night. The bolivar collapsed so badly that people began weighing stacks of cash instead of counting them. But here's the twist. Inflation alone isn't always fatal. The real death blow comes when trust disappears. Argentina is the perfect example. It has defaulted on its debt 9 times in its history. Each time, citizens lost faith in their own peso, rushing to buy US dollars instead. Today, Argentina's inflation still hovers above 100% a year because nobody believes in the peso's future. Meanwhile, Switzerland's franc is called a fortress currency. Why? Stability, low inflation, around 2% in 2023, and trust in the Swiss National Bank. That's why global investors stash their money in francs during crises. And in the wider world, the US dollar dominates because it commands 60% of global foreign exchange reserves and appears in nearly 90% of all forex trades. People trust Washington to honor debts, even with $36 trillion owed. Now, imagine this. What if tomorrow the world suddenly lost faith in the dollar? The entire global economy, from Tokyo to Lagos, would shake like a house of cards. Could printing ever actually make us rich? Here's the million-dollar question, or should I say the trillion-dollar one. If printing destroys countries like Zimbabwe or Venezuela, why do some nations print money and still thrive? Is it ever possible that printing can save an economy instead of wrecking it? Let's rewind to the ashes of World War II. Europe was devastated. Factories bombed, cities in ruins, 70 million people dead. America stepped in with the Marshall Plan of 1948, pumping $13 billion into Europe, over $150 billion in today's dollars. Most of this money came from government borrowing, which technically meant the US created more dollars. But here's the difference. The money didn't vanish into endless consumption. It was invested into rebuilding roads, railways, steel plants, and housing. Within a decade, Western Europe's economy had doubled in size. Printing and debt worked because they were tied to real production. Now, jump to the 2008 financial crisis. Banks collapsed, housing prices crashed, and millions lost jobs. The US Federal Reserve launched a policy called quantitative easing, QE. Translation? They created trillions of new dollars electronically and used them to buy government bonds and mortgage securities. By 2014, the Fed had printed more than $3.5 trillion. Many feared Zimbabwe-style inflation, but it didn't happen. Why? Because demand was collapsing, and the new money mostly stayed locked inside banks, stabilizing the system rather than flooding supermarkets. Inflation barely touched 2%. But let's not get too comfortable. When governments lose discipline, printing becomes poison. Zimbabwe printed to pay salaries and buy loyalty. Venezuela printed to cover collapsing oil revenues. Hungary in 1946 printed so much that prices doubled every 15 hours, the worst hyperinflation in recorded history. And here's where Manuel Ayo's insight cuts through the noise. Money is not treasure. It's not gold, not wealth, not a magic wand. It's only a tool for exchange, like a measuring stick. Imagine using a rubber ruler. If the unit keeps stretching, how can you measure anything? Real wealth is not the paper in your pocket. It's the bread, the phone, the car, the bridge, the invention. Wealth is what people produce and exchange. Money just makes the swap easier.
So the haunting question remains. If money isn't the true source of prosperity, what is?
The answer lies not in the printing press, but in the ability of societies to innovate, to produce, and above all, to preserve trust in their system. And trust, once lost, is almost impossible to buy back. You've just uncovered the dangerous truth about money printing, but that's only the surface. Tap the next video to join the insiders who know how economies really work. Don't leave with half the story. Discover the full picture now.